Yes, so I'm working at the moment as a senior research fellow for Equator here in Oxford, at the University of Oxford. Equator is an international network which is dedicated to improving the research transparency, primarily through the use of promoting the use of reporting guidelines. So reporting guidelines are like shopping lists for researchers to write up their study completely and transparently, so that the research that they do can be used and reaches its maximum potential. But I came to Oxford to work in 1989 I was a marketing assistant for a touring theatre company. So at the time, although 4 years previously I'd qualified, I'd got a degree in experimental psychology, I really wanted to be an arts manager. That didn't quite work out, so I spent 18 years then, I moved into publishing, which I really enjoyed, and I spent 18 years in various publishing companies. And then in 2008, everything changed for me, and I saw a very intriguing job advert in the Oxford Times for what was called a information specialist / trial search coordinator for the Cochrane collaboration, who I'd never heard of. I was very intrigued by this, and when I was doing the research for my application and then my interview, I became incredibly enthusiastic about the organisation. I didn't understand why it wasn't a household name. So the idea behind Cochrane is they gather together all the trials, all the best evidence possible, and summarise it together in documents which they call systematic reviews. So they'll bring all the trials of any particular treatment together in one place to give a summary of the best evidence for that treatment. I thought it was an absolutely brilliant idea and didn't understand why Cochrane wasn't a household name. So I landed the job with the Cochrane Pain and Palliative Care Group, which is based in Oxford, and when I joined in 2008, there were 52 different review groups covering different disease areas, and I was proud to be part of it. My job, I don't know quite how I got the job because I had no library experience and no medical health research background, but I think enthusiasm can obviously get you a long way. And large part of my job was writing search strategies to search bibliographic databases of medical research. So this is that's quite a short one actually, to search for trials about non-invasive physical treatment for pain. So this is how I spent my days, compiling these sort of complicated search strategies. And I really enjoyed it, and I felt I was lucky to be part of such an amazing organisation. But I did have a few concerns fairly early on that maybe Cochrane wasn't quite the perfect organisation I thought it was. So, for example, I was working on researches for two reviews of different therapies, both quite established therapies, one complementary and one a kind of a physiotherapist-delivered therapy. And when I was working on these two, I was a bit concerned that one of the review of the complementary therapy was carried out by authors who were all practicing that therapy in their own practice. There were very few trials. They found only 8 trials. And in their review, they concentrated on the fact that 2 of the trials, which were good quality, showed a beneficial effect. And their conclusion was, we have to do more of these trials to kind of, bolster this encouraging finding. Now, the other review was conducted by a physiotherapist who was sceptical about the treatment, which I think is always good. I assumed that all Cochrane reviewers were sceptical, they wanted to know the truth. So this review has been updated twice since I worked on it. It's found a lot of trials, 94 trials altogether, and the conclusion is that the trials are so small and, poorly conducted that you can't really tell whether the treatment works or not. And this is extraordinary, from 2000 in 10 years, the research hadn't moved on. So the conclusion of the latest version was that no more updates should be done to the review until better trials are done. And I spoke to this reviewer a few years after the latest update, the 2014 update, and he said, when this review had been published saying it may not work, there was a huge backlash from the clinical proponents of the treatment. Everybody was up in arms that their wonderful treatment possibly didn't work. So it just underlined to me that Cochrane, I assumed that Cochrane were independent and sort of unbiased about these things, but a lot is swings on the attitude of the reviewers and the attitude of the medical establishment towards whatever treatment you're reviewing, which I thought wasn't right. So in 2010, I got more and more interested in public involvement in research, and in 2010 I had a wonderful opportunity to work with the Cochrane Dementia Group, who got some funding to do a project on recruiting and training carers of people with dementia to get involved in Cochrane and get involved in research. But sadly and ironically, at exactly the same time, my mother started developing symptoms of dementia. This was a big taboo at home, and I couldn't even get excited about the fact I was working for the dementia group because it was such a taboo word, which was really sad and ironic. And it was incredibly difficult for me to actually try and get a diagnosis from my mother. She was diagnosed with depression by the GP and given some medication that, in fact, when I talked to the experts that I was working with in Cochrane, dementia experts, they said, well, this particular antidepressant is likely to make her memory worse, not better. So, this was awful. So without my parents' permission, I just got desperate and phoned the GP and asked him to refer her to a memory clinic, which he wasn't planning to do. And then finally, after nearly a year, she was diagnosed with vascular dementia. So this is where working with Cochrane became really useful. So immediately, I found a review which was looking at a drug called donepezil, which is used for Alzheimer's patients. But this review said there's some evidence that it also works for people with vascular dementia. So I was very excited about this, and I accompanied my parents to the first appointment with an old age psychiatrist, and I waved the review at him and said, look, this could help her. Can you prescribe this? And he was impressed that I worked for Cochrane, and he talked to me in a different way than I think he might have done if I hadn't, which was, part of the battle. And but unfortunately, he couldn't prescribe it because it's not been licensed by NICE for people with vascular dementia, only Alzheimer's. So the only way that I could have got her the drug was either get my dad to pay for it privately, or, which he wouldn't have understood, it would have been a nightmare, or get her to have an MRI scan to see whether she had Alzheimer's as well as vascular, so a mixed dementia, or take part in a clinical trial of this drug, which would have meant her travelling to Cambridge and stuff. And she was distressed as it was, as you can imagine. I couldn't put her through it, so that was the end of that. But the psychiatrist who was looking after us, was quite interested in research, I discovered, because of this. He was excited that I knew about research as well, and he managed to get them enrolled on a trial of cognitive stimulation therapy for dementia. So this was happening locally, so she didn't have to travel anywhere, and it actually involved the research team training my father to give cognitive stimulation to my mother, which he quite enjoyed. I'm not sure she did, but I started calling them the dyad because that's what the research jargon for research participants that come as a pair. So I was calling them dyads. My mum didn't understand, my dad didn't understand either, but I thought it was very funny. But kind of, I mean, it was all, not great, as you can imagine. But kind of, as sort of therapy for me in a way, I started, I volunteered to write for a blog site called The Mental Elf, which is part of the National Elf Service. Very clever. So they cover, so the blogs are written mainly by clinician, research friendly for clinicians for a clinician audience to try and keep them up to date with research. And I volunteered myself, although I'm not a clinician by any stretch. And I found it, I could rip into the research and rip it to ribbons, and it kind of, but at the same time it was very disappointing that I couldn't, none of the research I was able to help my mother with. But anyway, back to the project, which is why I was working for the dementia group. This was a very innovative project. It was designed to improve understanding of dementia and dementia research amongst carers of people with dementia, or former carers who wanted to give something back, who wanted to get involved. We wanted to, have this army of evidence-savvy carers running around the NHS, sort of banging the drum for evidence and good quality research. And the way we did it was by offering a unique digital task that was useful for Cochrane, and we hoped would be useful for the people who volunteered. We didn't just limit it to carers of people with dementia. We wanted anybody with an interest and an internet connection to take part. So this is, it's not very clear, but this is a database of dementia trials, which is curated and built by the dementia group. So it's really good because it's study-based. So there's a record for every single study on a treatment for dementia or something that's supposed to prevent dementia. So it groups the studies into a study record with lots of useful information about that study. So it's not a paper. It kind of gathers the information about the actual study together in one place, and it's freely available for researchers and very useful for Cochrane to build their reviews. So what we wanted to do, the volunteer task, was to get carers of people with dementia, or whoever wanted to do it, to read a journal article like this, which is, no mean feat, and extract crucial bits of information about the trial, like the study ID, the number of participants, what diagnosis they had, what the intervention was, what outcomes they looked at, that kind of thing. So really useful information all gathered in one place. And we wanted our volunteers to do this online at home with a little bit of training. So we tried, we had fun trying to recruit people to do this. We had a skills workshop for carers, and which was really popular actually, because people were desperate to know what was going on in research and how they could help. That was really, and also I also went round carers groups and around the area. But as you can imagine, I mean, although I got told an hour, I don't think I recruited anybody from that particular lunch club, but everybody was supportive and interested, but it was obviously quite difficult to recruit them to a task if they weren't particularly IT, particularly internet friendly, or so we had a bit of trouble. We got a few, but we had a bit of trouble. But what we found was that lots of other people were very interested in it, both inside Cochrane and outside Cochrane. Young people, like medical students, trainee psychologists, urologists, and we found school science teachers, and school kids were quite interested in the task as well. And this is my daughter, age 14, trying to do it. She was desperate, she was desperate for a task for her DV, the Duke of Edinburgh, and I caught her, and she did about 10 records, and I mean, it's quite a complicated task, but she could do it, and she was 14, The other part of the project, which was kind of more significant in a way for me in my journey, was building a set of interactive online modules. So it was all about teaching all about statistics and research in a kind of accessible way. And because we were aiming at people interested in dementia, I used dementia examples. And it was also trying to explain Cochrane, which was, again, quite difficult to do in a kind of user-friendly way. But I had a go, and they were well received, both inside and outside Cochrane. And I had great ambitions for how this kind of approach to curating evidence could change the world and get more patients and the public involved. But also during, in the process of building these modules and putting them together and doing the background, I found myself getting more and more horrified by the reality of, no, honestly, this is every day. There were lots of issues that I don't think the public are fully aware of. I think the public may be getting a bit more aware of it now, but it was all a bit of a shock for me, and I've been working in research for a few years. But there are lots of things that go on that you don't know about that are quite difficult to detect when you're reading a journal article. And I was particularly, even at the time, before I got into the realm of ME research, I was particularly sort of disturbed by the fact that although there was a lot of attention on the bias caused by in trials of pharmaceutical interventions, drugs and so on, that were sponsored by drug companies, and everybody's quite aware of that, but there was no real kind of sort of worry that there was a problem with when in behavioural and psychological treatments that the researcher allegiance would have a big effect, could have a big effect on research. So this is kind of, I was getting more and more misgivings about Cochrane, but I wanted Cochrane to do more about these problems. So this is so the project, we called it the Alois Community Project because the database was called Alois. The reason it's called Alois is because named after Alois Alzheimer. So we built this website, we built a community, we built quite a following, and cheerleading of what we were trying to do, trying to really crowdsource what Cochrane was doing and get people enthusiastic about what we were doing. And this website is still it's very out of date, obviously it's 2012, I stopped work on it, but it's still up there. And even when I left the project, I was still really hoping, I still felt like this, my feelings have changed a bit, as you'll find out, but I just thought the idea of the Cochrane was great, and it would be wonderful to scope up the project so that it could cover not just dementia, but all other areas of research, and get patients and patient advocate groups to contribute to build a whole, a comprehensive database that everybody could see, the landscape of research and see what's going wrong with it as well as what's going right. But Cochrane didn't see it like that, so I kind of slunk away, and but I still kept on trying to interact with Cochrane and trying to persuade them that it would be really good to get patients to not only contribute to Cochrane but input to Cochrane to change the way Cochrane did things. So I carried on with that kind of general push when I left Cochrane in 2014. So I carried on with this, and I worked for Equator in training and education, and I kept on posting stuff on social media. And one day in September, it was in September 2016, I posted on my Facebook page this article. I don't know if any of you've seen it, by Julie Raymer, which was about about the PACE trial, basically. And I was when I read the article, I was so shocked. I didn't know anything about ME at all at that time, not really. I knew a bit about the PACE trial, but I was just shocked by the story. I never heard. I couldn't believe it had happened. And so I had a little rant on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook anymore, but I did manage to retrieve my little rant about patient power. I felt really strongly about it. I was quite angry that it should take such a core battle and to access the data from a publicly funded trial. So that was on a Friday, and then on Saturday, when something happens and it sounds a bit dramatic, but you remember where you were when something happened. This message popped up on my Facebook feed from a woman called Larun, and I was friends with her because she'd been on an Equator course. So I organised training courses for Equator. And so I knew her, I was friends with her on Facebook, and this popped up and I was really, really confused. I had no idea why she was being, when people say be careful, then I just think, I was very upset and confused. And I didn't know what she was on about. So, and the worst thing was, so on Monday when I went into work, she had written to my boss to complain about my Facebook. It was on my first personal Facebook page. She'd written to my boss to say that she was disappointed in my behaviour as somebody who worked for Equator. And so I was so shocked. And my boss was lovely, and I just explained. She didn't see anything wrong with it, and so she wrote back to Lauren saying, I was perfectly within my rights to post about patient. My passion for patient involvement on my personal Facebook page, and I don't know exactly what Lauren said, but after that incident, I didn't know why Lauren would know anything about PACE or would be reanalyzing the data, and then I just thought, okay, she must be doing a Cochrane review, which she had. She published a review, and everything kind of fell into place. I didn't know, as I say, I didn't know anything about ME before, but I had read this. I find this quite
yeah, infamous.
Yeah, I read this in 2015 before I knew anything about ME at all, and because I blogged for the mental health, I found it interesting, and I didn't think anything of the fact it was on the mental health, not any other area of the blog. And I read it, and it was very well written, and I thought, this, gosh, how interesting, they did a great trial. I really did. That's what I thought in 2015. And then after this incident, I went back, I read it again, and I read the comments, which were all backing up what Julie Riemir, the article had said, and there were 242 comments, some very, very long, and they were all negative, pretty much all negative. And then I then went back to the review and looked at the comments. There were 12 comments, and some, including Tom Kindlin and the late Robert Courtney. And I didn't, they were so long, I couldn't read them all. But I knew that something was very wrong with this review. And to cut a very long story short, I kind of wrote to everybody I could think of that might think this was outrageous, and nobody really did. So, but I discovered, or nobody in Cochrane or associated with Cochrane did anyway. And nobody would kind of back me up. So I wrote a few emails to Cochrane about it, and nothing happened. And then eventually in November 2018, I decided I kind of somehow persuaded them to invite me to submit my complaint. I think I just annoyed them so much, they just said, just complain already, So I wrote a 1,000-word complaint, which was just hashing it. It took me. It didn't take me very long. It took me less than an hour because I was just so angry. And so, I had to number it because otherwise it would just look so disorganised. So I numbered it and hoped for the best. And that's what I ended with, which I felt really strongly about. I had been put in contact with a patient. I knew nobody with ME until I was put in email contact with somebody who had been complaining about this review since before it was published. Since 2013, this person had been writing to Cochrane about it and trying to stop them. And so I had been in email contact with them for a long time. And I just wanted to add, I just wanted to do something. So then in January, David Tovey, who was the editor-in-chief, I was annoyed because I'd written to the governors about it, and they'd immediately said, oh no, it's editorial. The editor-in-chief will reply, and I'd been complaining about the editor-in-chief, so it was just like, okay, I was annoyed by that. So the editor-in-chief, David Tovey, wrote back to me, pretty defensive, inadequate response. So then I replied to him with a lot of help, 6,500 words this time, a bit more organised and detailed. And I had a lot of help from the friends I was gathering, like David Tuller and this person who likes to remain anonymous, but they really helped me put this together. It was fairly comprehensive, reply to David's. And I got even more kind of impassioned about, because this is what they're doing, they're just kind of ignoring it, like it's not really an issue, it's editorial, we'll just, just change the wording a bit and it'll be fine. I couldn't stand it. So I got no response, of course, to that. And then the only recourse I had was to appeal to the governors again to say, please can you reconsider? So I did that in April, and in May they replied 100 words in their email to me, saying they'd considered it carefully and supported the editor-in-chief. And I thought it was quite interesting, they were saying he'd acted in the best interest of Cochrane, for sure, and in a manner that best serves the public as a whole. Who cares about patients or people with ME? It was the message behind that. So if you want to read the whole saga, I've got a blog, so it's just got everything on it. And then in June, I just kind of gave up. But I didn't give up, but as you'll find out. But I gave up on the blog. But it's quite interesting to see. I did appeal to the Charity Commission because I felt that Cochrane weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing, and B, were potentially harming patients. But the Charity Commission, it wasn't in their remit or whatever. So they told me, that in the new policy, an example of a reason for withdrawal is that if following the conclusions of the published review could result in harm to patients or populations of interest, then it can be withdrawn. And I don't understand why they can't acknowledge that this is the case with this review and withdraw it, apart from the fact they want to protect the reputations of the researchers who produced the review. So before I finish, this is where I am now, but before I just want to thank the many people who've been with me, especially on the later stages of this journey where I've got involved in ME research and trying to help in what way I can, and including the wonderful David Tuller. And yeah, I don't know where to go next. I mean, with the Science.me community, I think they're an amazing bunch of people, and they really, I feel like if we could sort of extend the Alois community feel, to curate the research in a sensible way, to demonstrate, how bad it is. That might be a way to go in the future. I don't know, but yeah, I shall carry on activating as much as I can, and I hope this was reasonably interesting and not a very personal story, but you know, I feel quite strongly about it.
You certainly had an uphill struggle.
Yeah, I don't know why. Yeah.